There's a dad sitting in a quiet corner of a public library. He's not famous, not wealthy, and to most people, just another face in the background. He visits often, always alone. Just him, a notepad, and the soft rustle of turning pages. But one rainy Thursday afternoon, something happened. Something no one expected. This dad noticed a detail so subtle, so seemingly ordinary, that everyone else ignored it. But it would go on to change the fate of a CEO worth hundreds of millions. And it all started in a moment no one paid attention to, except him. Now ask yourself, what could a quiet dad, tucked between dusty shelves and the faint hum of the printer, possibly observe that would rewrite a company's destiny? And more importantly, how did everyone else miss it? This isn't fiction. It's not a motivational parable. It's a real story. And it proves one thing: wisdom doesn't always wear a suit or sit in a skyscraper. Sometimes, it wears sneakers and hangs out near the children's section. But before we reveal what he saw, let's pause for a second. If you believe in the power of perspective, hit that like button right now. It helps us reach more people who love these real, mind-shifting stories. And here's a challenge: if you've ever been the one who noticed something nobody else did, share it in the comments. Or just drop a eyes emoji. We see you. And trust me, you're not alone. Also, if this is the kind of content you crave, where storytelling meets strategy and ordinary people shape extraordinary outcomes, hit that subscribe button. You don't want to miss what's coming next. Okay, back to the story. The CEO we're talking about wasn't always desperate. In fact, just months before this moment in the library, he was riding high. Press articles, TED Talks, interviews, you name it. His company was the darling of tech media, and he was the man behind it all. But pressure? It creeps in. Slowly at first, then all at once. He'd been burning out, his decisions were slipping, the market was shifting, and competitors were closing in. Investors were asking questions he couldn't answer. The once clear vision, blurry now. So, he did what many powerful people rarely admit: they step away. For just a few hours that afternoon, he walked out of the boardroom and into the library. No assistants, no calls. Just quiet. Hoping the silence would somehow offer answers the meetings couldn't. That's when he saw him. The dad. Sitting alone. Focused. Noticing something on a whiteboard pinned to the wall, something others walked past 100 times. A message scribbled in dry erase, almost erased entirely. But the dad paused. He leaned in. And what he said out loud, barely more than a whisper, made the CEO freeze. Not because it was loud. But because it was right. It was the kind of insight you only get from someone with nothing to prove. And this was the beginning of everything. You see, in today's world, we're obsessed with the loudest voice in the room. The experts. The influencers. The data-driven decisions. But sometimes, clarity doesn't come from complexity, it comes from stillness. From someone who has no stake in the outcome. Someone who's just paying attention. The CEO didn't come to the library looking for a mentor. He came to escape. But the universe has a strange way of placing people in your path, not always the ones you expect, but the ones you need. That dad wasn't a consultant. He wasn't a startup guru. He didn't even have a LinkedIn profile. But what he saw, and what he said, cut through the noise in a way no pitch deck ever could. And that is the reason you're watching this video. So stay with us. Because by the end of this story, you won't just know what happened, you'll understand why it happened. And maybe, just maybe, you'll start noticing the details that change everything. Now let's go back to the start, the CEO's rise, his unraveling, and the decision that brought him to that exact library, on that exact day. Let the story begin. Before the whisper in the library, before the turning point, there was pressure. Mounting. Constant. The CEO, let's call him Mark, wasn't just a leader. He was a symbol. His startup had been the golden child of tech media, once hailed as the company that would redefine the industry. Investors lined up. Articles were written. And Mark? He was in the spotlight every day. But behind the scenes, things were crumbling. It started with small issues. A key hire quit. A major feature got delayed. Then customer complaints started piling in. The product wasn't evolving fast enough, and competitors were catching up. Slowly, the glow faded. Mark found himself drowning in decisions, each one heavier than the last. Pivot or stay the course? Cut costs or invest in growth? Every choice felt like walking a tightrope. At first, he tried to hide the stress. Smiles in public, panic in private. But inside, he was spiraling. Emails went unanswered. Team morale dropped. His CTO was threatening to leave. And the board? They wanted numbers. Results. A turnaround plan. Sleep became a luxury. Meals were skipped. He stopped returning calls from old friends. Even his family noticed the distance. His daughter asked him, "Daddy, why are you always angry?" That one hit hard. One morning, after back-to-back crisis meetings, he sat in his office staring at his hands. Trembling. Not from caffeine, but from the weight of it all. The numbers weren't adding up. The market was reacting. The cracks were no longer invisible, they were obvious. And Mark knew, he couldn't fake it anymore. He needed a reset. Not a strategy session. Not another consultant. He needed space. Silence. Something to break the noise loop in his head. So he grabbed his coat and left. No plan. No destination. Just walking. Blocks away, the library appeared. He hadn't been inside one in years. But something about it, maybe the stillness, maybe the childhood nostalgia, drew him in. He stepped inside, welcomed by the hush only libraries have. It was like time slowed down. He wasn't a CEO in there. Just another man trying to breathe. That's when he found a seat. No laptop, no phone. Just stillness. And that's when the dad came into view. Not flashy. Just present. Calm. Observing. Mark didn't know it yet, but that man, sitting near the biography section, was about to say something that would untangle the knot in his brain. And let's not sugarcoat it, Mark was scared. Not the kind of fear that makes you jump at shadows. The kind that eats away at your confidence. That makes you second-guess every instinct. That whispers, maybe you're not as smart as they said. He looked at his calendar and saw 20 back-to-back meetings scheduled for the next day. Strategy reviews, investor calls, press prep. But none of them mattered if the core of the company was crumbling. His mind wandered back to the early days, two guys in a coffee shop, pitching an idea nobody believed in. Back then, every decision was fueled by intuition. By vision. Somewhere along the way, that got lost. Replaced by metrics, dashboards, and endless noise. And in that library, for the first time in months, there was no noise. No performance reviews. No Slack notifications. No financial models. Just silence. Mark looked around. Students studying. A toddler giggling. A teenager flipping through a manga novel. Life was happening, without panic. That contrast hit him hard. How had he gone from being a builder to a firefighter? From creating something meaningful to constantly plugging leaks? He reached for a nearby magazine, old, slightly torn. Not business-related. Just stories. Human stories. And as he flipped through it, something softened in him. The tightness in his chest began to ease. That's when he saw the whiteboard. It was off to the side. A simple board labeled "Thought of the Day." Barely legible. Half erased from the day before. But someone, maybe a staff member, maybe a visitor, had scribbled something new. 5 words. The dad was standing in front of it, reading silently. Then he said something under his breath. 5 words. Barely a whisper. But it was those 5 words that would hit Mark harder than any investor feedback, any leadership course, or any business book ever had. Words that would peel back the layers of stress and remind him what really mattered. Words that would later become the headline of his company's turnaround presentation. And words that we'll reveal, in just a moment. Because first, we need to meet the man who said them. And understand why he was the only one who could. To understand the moment, you have to understand the man. The dad, his name was Samuel, wasn't there by accident. He visited the library almost daily. Not for internet access or the newspaper, but because it was the one place he could think. He was a former engineer. Retired early after a workplace injury and a few bad turns in life. These days, his world was slower. He walked his dog in the mornings, visited the library in the afternoons, and wrote notes to himself in a small leather-bound journal. People didn't notice him. But Samuel noticed everything. It was just his nature. He read between the lines. Listened more than he spoke. And while he no longer worked in tech, he never stopped thinking like an engineer, spotting inefficiencies, observing systems, and constantly asking, what's not working here? That day, he saw the whiteboard. He'd walked past it 100 times. But something was different. The message was fading, sure, but its meaning was loud. He squinted, trying to make out the faint scrawl. That's when Mark walked in. Their eyes didn't meet at first. Mark was somewhere else, in his head, drowning in thought. But when he finally noticed the dad standing near the board, pausing, looking like he was solving a puzzle, Mark stopped. He didn't know why, but he approached. Samuel looked over, smiled faintly, and stepped aside, allowing Mark to see the board for himself. The message read, "Are you solving the right problem?" Simple. Almost cliché. But in that moment, it hit like thunder. Mark stared at it. Not blinking. Samuel, sensing something, quietly said, "Most people waste their lives solving problems that never mattered." Mark turned to him. "Sorry, what did you say?" Samuel repeated it. Calm. Kind. Then added, "You look like someone who's been solving everything. Except the thing that really matters." Silence. Mark didn't respond immediately. He just nodded. The words echoed in his mind like a bell that refused to stop ringing. Samuel didn't press. He just smiled again, turned back to his seat, and continued reading his book, as if he hadn't just dropped a philosophical nuke. Mark stood there for a few minutes more. Frozen. The gears in his brain turning in a different direction now. Something had shifted. It wasn't a solution. Not yet. But it was a new lens. A crack in the mental fog. And it would change everything. You see, Samuel wasn't just being poetic. He had lived that question. Years ago, he'd been in Mark's shoes, leading a product team for a billion-dollar tech company. He was known for solving problems fast, making things work. But one day, after pushing through back-to-back launches and long nights, his body gave out. A nerve condition in his back, chronic, irreversible. Doctors told him to stop. So he did. Not just from work, but from the noise. For a while, Samuel felt lost. Identity gone. No board meetings, no deadlines, no purpose. Until one morning, while walking past the same whiteboard, he asked himself, what problem am I even solving now? That became his ritual. He started writing it down daily. Observing life through that lens. When the library staff noticed, they let him write the message on the board whenever he came in. Most people ignored it. But not Mark. After reading it and hearing Samuel's whisper, Mark sat down. There was an awkward pause, but then, he opened up. Not about everything. Just a little. About stress. About confusion. About the feeling that he was doing so much. And yet getting nowhere. Samuel listened. Fully. No interruptions. No advice. When Mark finally finished, Samuel said one thing, you know. Sometimes we're not stuck because we lack solutions. We're stuck because we're chasing the wrong outcome. Mark looked stunned. So, how do you know what the right problem is? Samuel smiled. You sit in silence long enough. The wrong ones get quiet. Those words settled in Mark's chest like a stone dropped into still water. They didn't talk much more after that. Mark thanked him, wrote something in his own journal, and left the library. But that conversation, short, quiet, completely unplanned, became the seed that would reshape his entire approach. And it wasn't over. Because what Mark did next would ripple far beyond his own career. And what Samuel said during their second conversation. That's what transformed insight into action. That's next. Mark couldn't stop thinking about it. That one sentence Samuel whispered, "Are you solving the right problem?" looped in his head all night. He didn't sleep. He didn't eat. He just thought. He pulled out old notebooks, pitch decks, product strategy docs, post-it notes. Everything he'd been building for the past 5 years. He wasn't looking for numbers anymore, he was looking for meaning. And it started to become clear, they'd been solving for growth, not value. His team had become obsessed with beating competitors, capturing market share, going viral. But somewhere along the way, they'd forgotten the core problem they set out to solve in the first place. It was never about being first. It was about being useful. Mark called an emergency offsite the next day, not to fix revenue, not to brainstorm features, but to ask everyone the same question: what problem are we actually solving? The room was quiet at first. Then the responses came in, different answers from everyone. Confusion. Misalignment. Even defensiveness. And that's when Mark knew, this was the root of it all. So he scrapped the roadmap. Paused marketing campaigns. Froze hiring. And instead, initiated what he called the reset week. Every team had to go back to square one. No laptops. Just whiteboards and questions. At the top of every board, what problem are we solving? That week, something changed. The product team discovered a user segment they'd been ignoring, people who use their platform not for speed, but for security. A niche, but deeply loyal. Customer support flagged a pain point that had been treated as a low-priority bug for months, but was actually causing a major drop in trust. The marketing team realized their messaging promised things the product no longer delivered. And the CEO, Mark, realized he had been the one pushing everyone away from the real problem all along. He wrote a memo titled, "We've been solving the wrong problem." It went viral internally. One of the board members, known for being brutally pragmatic, replied with a one-line email, "This is the smartest thing you've done in 2 years." And slowly, things began to move. Not overnight. But differently. With purpose. Churn dropped. Satisfaction scores rose. The product found its soul again. Growth came back, not as a goal, but as a side effect of solving the right problem. And guess what the first slide of Mark's next investor pitch said? 5 words. In big, bold font, "Are you solving the right problem?" Below it, credit to a stranger at the library. Investors noticed the shift, not just in numbers, but in energy. Customers started writing in unsolicited, thanking the company for finally listening. One even said, "For the first time, I feel like this product was made for me, not someone else." Mark's own mindset evolved, too. He stopped treating leadership as a game of chess and started treating it like a practice of listening. Meetings became shorter. Feedback loops got tighter. And the most common phrase in internal Slack channels became, "Is this solving the real problem?" But beyond all of that, something deeper happened. Employees who had mentally checked out started re-engaging. People stopped job hunting. One longtime engineer said during a team sync, "I finally feel like I'm part of something again." Culture doesn't shift from perks or parties. It shifts from clarity. And clarity had come from one man, in one moment, in one library. So when Mark walked into that same library a few weeks later, this time holding a printed version of the investor pitch, he had just one mission: to say thank you. Samuel was there. Same seat. Same book. Same quiet presence. Mark approached, smiled, and handed him the slide deck. Samuel flipped through it slowly. Then he looked up and said, "You found your real question." Mark nodded. "Thanks to you." Samuel shrugged. "You were ready to hear it. That's the only reason it worked." They didn't speak much more. No viral video. No photo op. Just a nod between two people who understood that sometimes, the right words at the right time don't just change a business, they change a life. And that's what Samuel had done. He reminded a CEO that sometimes, the answer isn't bigger, it's simpler. And now, that same question lives on. On office walls. In strategy decks. In Slack messages. And maybe, even on the whiteboard of a library near you. All because someone asked, "Are you solving the right problem?" That's the power of one sentence. And the humility to listen. It didn't happen in a single quarter. Mark knew better than to expect miracles. But something had shifted in the company, and it wasn't just internal. Their users began to talk. Slowly at first, in forums and chat groups. Then publicly. Something was different about the company. Support was better. Updates made sense. The product felt human again. Word spread. Journalists who had written critical reviews months earlier reached out asking for follow-ups. One headline read, "From startup fatigue to customer first, what changed at company name?" Behind the scenes, the changes were simple but profound. Meetings started with a single shared document titled, "The Real Problem." Teams weren't allowed to pitch ideas unless they tied back directly to that problem. Departments worked cross-functionally again, not just in silos. Engineers shadowed support reps, designers interviewed actual users. The culture became obsessed, not with disruption, but with clarity. The CEO stopped chasing unicorn status and started talking about sustainability. The company shrank in headcount but grew in impact. One of the major investors, previously skeptical, doubled down. "This team gets it now," he told a partner. "They're not reacting, they're responding." But the biggest comeback wasn't financial. It was cultural. 1 year after the library moment, the company released a feature that became their most successful ever, not because it was flashy, but because it directly solved a lingering user pain point they had ignored for too long. Internally, that product was codenamed Samuel. When asked why, Mark said, "It's our reminder to always listen before we build." And that mindset rippled outward. Other CEOs began citing Mark's memo. Podcasts analyzed the turnaround. A few universities used the story as a case study in leadership classes. But when Mark was asked during a keynote what sparked the change, he didn't talk about strategy or frameworks. He told a story. Of a library. A whiteboard. And a man who asked a better question. And in that audience, somewhere in the back, was Samuel. Still wearing sneakers. Still unnoticed. Still listening. And smiling, quietly. Internally, something else bloomed: trust. Departments that once worked like separate islands started building bridges. Teams started holding silence sessions every Friday, 30 minutes of no meetings, no screens, just reflection. Not everyone took it seriously at first, but over time, some of the most creative solutions came from those quiet moments. Even the office design changed. They removed half the glass-walled meeting rooms and replaced them with focus zones, areas without Wi-Fi where employees could think, journal, or read. Mark got the idea from, where else? The library. A year into the comeback, the company ran its first user feedback summit. They invited 50 customers, including some of their harshest critics. They didn't pitch them anything. They just listened. One customer stood up and said, "You've made me feel heard." That's rare. Retention went up. The brand reputation shifted. Former employees who had left started applying to come back. The comeback wasn't loud. It was intentional. The boardroom was quieter too, but not in a tense way. More focused. One investor, usually impatient, said during a review, "For once, I don't feel like I'm being sold. I feel like I'm being told the truth." Mark even began mentoring other founders, not on how to scale fast, but how to pause. He told them, everyone's rushing to find answers. But the leaders who ask the right questions? They're the ones who actually build something that lasts. And behind every story he told, there was always one constant. That day. That sentence. That man. Eventually, someone suggested naming a conference room Samuel. Instead, the team painted 5 words on the wall outside every entrance: "Are you solving the right problem?" Because it wasn't just a comeback story. It was a values reset. And it started with a whisper. Mark always felt there was something left unsaid. That first meeting with Samuel had changed everything, but it was brief, almost accidental. He had always wanted to know more. Why did Samuel say what he said? What made him pause at the whiteboard? Was it really just chance? So months later, Mark invited him to coffee. It took a little convincing. Samuel wasn't one for praise or recognition. But eventually, they met. 2 men from different worlds, linked by one moment of clarity. They sat across from each other in a small, quiet cafe. Mark ordered a black coffee. Samuel, herbal tea. Mark leaned in and asked the question he'd been carrying for months: "Why did you say that sentence?" Samuel smiled, soft and knowing. "Because you looked like someone who was drowning in answers, and starving for the right question." That line hit Mark like a second wave. He asked, "How did you know I was ready to hear it?" Samuel replied, "Because you stopped pretending. Most people walk into rooms carrying shields: ego, ambition, busyness. But you walked into that library like someone searching, not someone selling. That's rare." Then he added something even deeper. "I've been that man. Solving the wrong problems. Building things just to prove I could. But no matter how far you run, the wrong question will always lead you back to the wrong place." Mark didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Because it all made sense now. Samuel hadn't just dropped wisdom. He had lived it. Felt it. Paid for it in time and silence. And what he gave Mark wasn't advice. It was permission. Permission to slow down. To reflect. To reframe. As their coffee cooled, they talked about books, family, failure. Not once about funding rounds or quarterly goals. Just life. Mark walked away from that meeting feeling something rare in the startup world: peace. He'd finally solved the problem that mattered. And it wasn't product market fit. It was personal. Samuel shared more of his past. He talked about his early days in tech, how he had spent years chasing titles, pay raises, and prestige. "I was always the fixer," he said. "The guy who could solve anything. Until I realized I was solving my way into burnout." He recalled working 60-hour weeks, missing birthdays, skipping anniversaries, all under the belief that building mattered more than being. "And then one day, I woke up and couldn't move. My back was done. So was I." At first, he said, the silence was brutal. "I didn't know who I was without the noise. No one emailed me. No one needed me. That kind of quiet, it's terrifying." But eventually, the silence became his teacher. "I started noticing the world again. The way people move. The way they speak. The questions they don't ask." He pointed to his tea. "I used to gulp everything. Now, I sip." Mark listened, transfixed. He'd never heard someone speak so openly about slowing down in a world that glorified speed. Then Samuel asked him a question. "What would happen if your company disappeared tomorrow? Would people miss it, or just replace it?" Mark didn't answer right away. But that question stayed with him long after the conversation ended. It reminded him that true value isn't just in what we build, but in how deeply it matters to others. As they wrapped up, Mark offered to bring Samuel in as a leadership coach. Samuel declined, kindly. "You don't need more frameworks," he said. "You just need to remember the question." Mark nodded, smiling. "And I will." They parted ways with no photos, no handshake, just a quiet mutual respect between two men who had learned, in very different ways, the same truth: the right problem, when solved, fixes everything else. And sometimes, it takes losing your way to learn how to really see. Samuel taught Mark how to see. And now, it's your turn. Because the next person to notice something no one else sees might be you. Here's what most people forget: we live in a world obsessed with noise, more data, faster answers, louder opinions. But real breakthroughs? They often come in silence. From a whisper in a library. From a man with no title, no agenda, just wisdom shaped by experience and reflection. Samuel didn't change the world with a keynote. He didn't write a viral thread. He simply noticed something, and cared enough to say it out loud. And Mark? He didn't pivot his company because of market pressure. He pivoted because someone asked a better question at the exact right time. That's the power of observation. That's the power of humility. And that's the power of slowing down. So here's the question for you: are you solving the right problem? In your work? In your relationships? In your goals? Or are you sprinting toward outcomes that don't even belong to you? This story isn't about a CEO or a product. It's about noticing what matters, before it's too late. And maybe, just maybe, the person who changes your trajectory won't be a billionaire, but a quiet stranger in a place you never expected. Or maybe, you'll be that person for someone else. If this story moved you, share it. If it made you think, comment below with what stood out to you most. And if you want more stories like this, real, raw, and transformative, hit subscribe. Because sometimes, the quietest stories are the ones that echo the loudest. Thank you for watching. Think about this: what if the thing holding you back isn't lack of ambition, but a misaligned target? What if the noise around you is convincing you to chase answers, when what you really need is a better question? You don't have to be a CEO to face this. You can be a student choosing a major, a parent balancing career and kids, an artist unsure what to make next. We all hit moments where progress stalls, not because we're lazy or confused, but because we're solving the wrong thing. It takes courage to stop. It takes humility to ask, why am I really doing this? But that question? It could be your turning point. So here's your challenge: take 5 minutes today. Sit in silence. No phone. No music. No distractions. And just ask, what problem am I solving right now? Write down whatever comes up. It might surprise you. Because sometimes, the biggest wins don't come from doing more, but from doing the right thing. And if you found value in this video, please, don't keep it to yourself. Send it to someone who might need it. Like the video, so others can discover it too. And comment below, what problem are you solving? Let's talk about it. We read every single one. Finally, subscribe. Not because we're chasing numbers, but because we believe in creating stories that stick with you. Stories that make you pause, reflect, and maybe, choose a better path. You never know who you'll inspire next. And hey, maybe one day, someone will tell your story too.